Submitted for your approval. Submitted for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another dimension. Self.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Hello, hello, hello. You're listening to a podcast not only of sound but also of mind. It's Time to Rewind is a podcast that takes a journey into a wondrous land of time loops whose boundaries are that of imagination. I'm your host, Bubbawheat, and each episode my guest and I explore these time loops one loop at a time. This stop is Trapped in the Twilight Zone, and this is the first stop at 2020's Season 2, Episode 9, Try, where I got the chance to discuss the entire episode with the director, Jen McGowan.
I have watched it a couple times, and I have noticed a lot of interesting little details.
Oh, good. Maybe, I think. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, right off, I'm going to say that I love the episode, and
Thank you.
I've really watching it several times really did bring out a lot of extra details that really improve the viewing experience.
That's really wonderful to hear. I mean, I really loved it, and I felt I was given such a fantastic script to work with, and we got such great talent. It was pretty awesome.
So let me ask you: at one point in the process, did you come into the Twilight Zone? Because I know that TV series have different, they have many different directors, and this being an anthology series, that brings a whole different set of circumstances to it.
It does. And let's see, I think I was interviewed, I want to say it was December. It may have been even earlier than that. It may have been between Thanksgiving and Christmas. And then I shot we shot in January 2020. It was the last thing that I did before work shut down because of COVID.
Was the script there already? And
it was, and that was, and as you mentioned, I mean, it's different in television, and every type of television is different. Every show is different, because Twilight Zone is anthological. It's really cool for the directors because you're kind of getting your own little movie. The script, I don't know about the other episodes, but for Try, the script did exist when I got to interview for it, and I was able to read it, and that was great because I was super excited about it and I loved it. And I was able to talk specifically to the script and what I could bring to it, which is not always the case. Sometimes you don't get to read it in advance.
And what was it especially about the script that spoke to you?
I love the characters. I love the idea, and I love that the idea was tight. I could tell that the writer was incredibly smart. And he is much, much smarter than I, which the writers usually are. But Alex Rubens, who was awesome. And, it worked. And that's, as I'm sure you probably know better than anyone, that's hard in time travel material. Sometimes it breaks down. And I didn't feel that in this, although you can tell me, correct me if I'm wrong. And so that was exciting. Also, from a directing standpoint, the challenge of the material was actually quite big. It's a very simple episode. It's essentially two people walking and talking for 40 minutes. That's really hard to pull off as a director. And to me, that was exciting. I was like, I know I can do this. And I knew I could do it because I'd done it I've done that similar thing before on a much shorter time frame. But I felt like I could do it, but there was still definitely a challenge there that was exciting.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I do love the fact that it is two people, and that it's the time loop from a perspective that we don't usually get to see, because their focus is really on the person that's outside of the time loop rather than the person that's inside of it.
Yeah, and that was a funny thing to kind of get our heads around too, like for the talent and I, because you're right, that is different than what we normally see.
And one other thing that I noticed a lot, which I really loved, is you played a lot with focus and having the background and different characters in and out of focus a lot. What was your reasoning behind a lot of that?
So I have to think back to January. As a matter of fact, while we're talking, I'm going to bring up my my kind of master document so I don't forget anything. What I was trying to do, and this goes back to what we were just talking about, you know, when you're making any type of film or television, you communicate through change over time. Right. So that's change of visuals over time, change of performance over time, change of sound, whatever. And there's only so many tools you have to work with. And when you're talking about two people walking around, you have even fewer tools. So, you know, the changes become more apparent and more noticeable, you know, can sometimes go wrong, really. But what I was trying to do specifically with the focus, I focused very much on whose point of view it was and what was the particular element that they were looking at that moment. There were books that appeared throughout the show that were relevant. There were, for example, in the beginning, when Claudia is looking at Mark and assessing him, it was important to me that she was not looking at his mouth the whole time. You know, she was listening, but she was looking elsewhere to judge what she was hearing. So, you know, like that would dictate where the focus goes in an example like that.
Yeah, I also got the impression, you know, in times whenever we're put a bit more into Mark's point of view, that for him, nothing else around him mattered except for Claudia and himself.
Yes, that's absolutely right. And what I wanted to play with, and I hope and think I achieved, was that our allegiance to Mark and our sympathy for him shifts over time.
Yeah, there's a definite shift throughout the episode, and like I really love the one part, and I think really, and my favorite shot of the episode is whenever he starts just rattling off all these things that he knows about Claudia, and the camera does the rotating around.
Yay!
And that's really the point, and like the pivotal point in the episode where everything turns and everything gets just so much darker.
Absolutely. And that's an example of where I wanted to clearly communicate that to the audience. This is a change. This is a shift. And I also wanted the audience to feel what Claudia was feeling, which is, this is like the whole world is shifting around me. What is going on? This is not what I expected or understood. And this is kind of scary.
Yeah. And
so it's really fun when you come up with a shot that like exhibits all this. It's not possible all the time, you know, and sometimes that's not what you want to do. But when you can find a shot that, you know, does all of those things at once, it's exciting.
Yeah. And I love the addition of, you know, the sun going behind a cloud so that it also physically gets darker for a moment too.
So good. So good. And that was written in the script. And it's so wonderful when those details are in the script, because that's, you know, that's a writer thinking visually, thinking cinematically, and giving me something really fun to work with.
Yeah. And, you know, you mentioned the books, and in a podcast format like this, it is, I do like to focus on some of those little details, and I did try to get the titles of all the books, which some of them are hard to catch. I think so. That going in chronological order based on the flashbacks, I think the first book that he's holding, I think it says The Misfit.
That could be right. Yeah, I'm gonna have to trust you on this. I don't remember. I know what the thinking behind it was. I don't know what the results were.
And then I think the second one that was really hard to read, but I want to say that my best guess was it was the conspecifics. I wasn't sure if it said
Interesting.
conspiracies, but I think it said conspecifics, which that means like a group within the same species.
Right. I am checking right now to see if I have notes on this, because I know what we were talking about. I know that we were talking about subtle shifts because we didn't want it to be distracting, but we did want it to be there, kind of like a little Easter egg. I know that we came up with books that did not exist. Let me see if I can find.
Yeah, I know that the two that we can see fairly clearly is the third book in that sequence of flashbacks whenever he accidentally pushes her into the truck, and that's the portable Yanofsky.
Right, right, that's right. That's right. And that was the other thing. There was that element of kind of pretentiousness.
And not only that, but that's
intellectualism.
yeah. And that's also foreshadowed earlier in the episode because he quotes Yanofsky, and that's
right.
one of the early details that gets him in with Claudia. And then the other one, the one that he's carrying around through that on the day, is Lords of Imbecility.
Yes, and the other thing was about like how he can signal with the books, because she saw that book earlier. Maybe that would have been the thing. Because every time he tries, obviously with the title try, every time he tries, he tries a slightly different tact or angle or detail. As he says later on, he's lived this eternally.
Yeah, I also love just the little detail, like the other montage when he's just going through the various names of the masks. It's so funny because the name, like all the names are so similar to each other. It's like Bob Johnson and then Bob Thompson.
Yeah.
Like he just changes it so subtly.
Which I love, because that communicates that he's done this so many times. He's narrowed it down into this really fine distinction, rather than lots of difference between them. And Topher was amazing with that. That's right in his wheelhouse of comedy to play with. And I really enjoyed working with him. I thought it was fantastic all throughout. Yeah, and interesting because it's a little surprising.
Yeah, because he does this, he plays the awkward nerd, nice guy so well. It's coming from all his years spent as Eric Foreman on that 70s show.
Mm-hmm.
And even to a lesser extent, his turn at the villain in Spider-Man 3, which didn't work out too well for him. But I think that I think he brings something interesting to that role, and I think that he brings a similar energy to this role. But this really is written so much better that it works. That it brings it out of him that much better, where you get to see the villainous side, and
the backstory at the same time. You get to see the character development backstory, and each of them. That was another fun thing. I felt like the script provided each of these characters lots of rich information, but also room to play and room to fill stuff in on their own and make it their own.
What happens with a lot of Jordan Peele's Twilight Zone is the social commentary. And I did, of course, want to bring up, like, my perspective is that it's this nice guy toxic masculinity, and the sense of entitlement, where he's the nice guy, so that means
that's right, he's entitled. What's the problem? I'm doing all the things. I'm the nice guy. That's right, absolutely.
So was there anything else that you wanted to bring out with that in mind?
I will tell you that kind of comes out in little teeny ways. It comes out a lot in the editing of, for example, when things are falling apart right before the chase, the pacing of the editing, that's connected to how she's feeling, how stressful she is feeling, the size of the shots, how we're closing in on her and cutting off her options for escape, all those things. And that goes back to the theme, which is this good guy toxic masculinity, but from her perspective, which we don't always see. And that's something that was really fun to me too, to play with that, and to work with the actress on that.
Yeah, and you mentioned the removing her means of escape, and there is one close-up shot after they get out of the canoe where they leave the book and she leaves her phone. Yeah. And I've listened to a couple episodes where people discussed it, and a lot of people don't quite understand the importance of that right away, which I do think it is more subtle, but I got the impression that is, that's her leaving her phone there. That is one less method of escape that she has. Like that's, she's not able to use her phone to call for help, even though they are in a public place. They're somewhat isolated because it's not a very busy.
That's absolutely right. And I'll tell you a funny behind the scenes story about that. Actually, that is the one shot that the writer and I went back and forth about. I didn't want to include it because my feeling was, if we put it there, we're drawing attention to the thing that I don't want people to be thinking about. But we shot it in case we needed to clarify it, in case later we got to the end and audience was like, well, why didn't you just use her phone? Because the logic was, yes, she indeed did leave it there. And other ways that was reinforced, for example, is, I don't know if people pick up on this, but anytime you see them moving, they're going down. They're going down and they're going away from people. So there's more background in the beginning than there is at the end. There's more, constricted space at the end than there is at the beginning. And every time they walk, they always walk downwards. Because again, that's what I was trying to do, is isolate them. And have that be believable in a public space. If you're in the bowels of a museum with like the one exhibit that nobody goes to, that's kind of isolating.
Yeah. I also love a lot of the other just little subtle details that pops out, that's like the little callbacks. Even early on, whenever Claudia is dictating in her phone and she's looking at the masks, she's asking, are they terrifying or are they funny? Yeah. For which that also applies to Mark throughout, and she calls him a memorizer, which is also very appropriate for someone stuck in a time loop, because that's the only thing that they can bring with them. I did want to ask about Groundhog Day, of course, because I spent the past couple months really digging into Groundhog Day.
You're going to be the expert on that then. So, but yes, go ahead.
Because I love this, especially coming straight from Groundhog Day, because this feels like very much like Bill Murray's first date with Rita, whenever he's trying to get everything right, and then it fails, and then he gets slapped 7 times in a row. Right. And this is like an alternate universe where this is how it could have gone very wrong. But I've also noticed that there's a lot more time loop stories out there, and they often reference Groundhog Day within the text. Was that a conversation of whether or not to add the line, this is just like Groundhog Day, or some variation of that?
It's a really good question, and I do believe I think there may have been a reference in a draft that felt too. I believe the discussion was about it wouldn't have existed in our universe, in our Twilight Zone universe. And I think that's why the reference was taken out. But there definitely was a back and forth of that. And one draft, there was something in that referenced it specifically. I don't recall what it was. I think he made a joke or something, some cynical joke about it.
Well, there is 2 lines that I think it could almost be a very subtle reference to Groundhog Day, because at one point, Mark tells Claudia, "I love you," and Claudia says, "You don't know me." And that's the same lines that happens in Groundhog Day whenever during the first date, the where Bill Murray fails and gets slapped.
Well, I'll tell you what, if that is the exact same line, I didn't know it, but I guarantee the writer put it in there intentionally. There's not a word that this writer does unintentionally.
I think going back again to the toxic masculinity, I think there's also the element of consent and implied consent.
Yeah, definitely.
That happens a lot within this, because I know there's explicitly whenever Mark brings up that at one point Claudia did tell him that she loved him, and she has that great speech where she's like, what does that mean, no backsies anymore?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, there's so much, you can tell when it was written, like this is what our culture has been thinking about, for a couple of years now, thankfully. And that's the other thing that was really appealing to me about this is, yes, clearly we're talking about an issue, but it's weaved in and it's layered. And I think there's lots of different ways that, depending on what perspective you come from, at what point your sympathy shifts.
I do also like the discussion the two of them have with the sculpture, with the bird and the clamshell, where he had clearly
there are two different pages.
Yeah, they're so far from each other. But not only that, I love how he basically dismisses her point of view.
Yes.
And so much of his point of view in this story is him thinking that she's a perfect match for him, but he's manipulating her, but he's also manipulating himself.
Yeah, and it doesn't even occur to him whether he's a perfect match for her or not, kind of. And that the other thing I remember thinking about a lot, especially in the edit, was women are going to key to this much sooner likely than men. So I was very mindful of that, like, who's going to feel what at what point in time, because it's a very different perspective for each.
Yeah, and I did watch this the first time with my wife and daughter, and she's 14.
Oh, how did that go? I'm so curious.
They really liked it, but they also, I can't give you like exact timing, but they definitely, whenever, I think before the explicit turn, they were definitely like, this is creepy. He's really creepy.
Yeah, great. That's perfect. That's actually that's exactly what I was going for.
Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about your experience with Try and with the Twilight Zone? I did want to mention that I love how diverse this new series of Twilight Zone was, and how that definitely felt like it was a conscious effort to bring in more actors and directors and writers of color and gender.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely, it paid off well for them. I think, the tricky thing with, changing systems is that unless you are making a change consciously and, intentionally, the default is whatever the system is. And it's absolutely a mandate of Monkey Paw, and thankfully at the time, and I don't know that it's changed, but thankfully of CBS, because they recognize the value of that. And that's great for casting. That's super exciting as a filmmaker to be like, awesome, I get the whole world of actors to play with. And that's great.
Is it Kylie Bunbury?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yes, I did want to mention her because she was fantastic too, and I don't think that we mentioned her name. I know we mentioned Topher Grace because he's the more well known, but yeah, Kylie Bunbury, she was fantastic. She played the entire range from the distracted college woman that's just falling for this guy that seems like a nice guy into getting creeped out by him, and then going full turn and
Yeah.
becoming the strong woman and taking him out.
Yeah.
But I'd like to thank you for spending the time to talk with me. It was a real pleasure to talk with you.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about? Any upcoming projects you have, or I know?
Well, it's funny. I actually have an upcoming time travel movie, but I can't talk about it just yet. I thought, oh, yay, I hope we get to talk about that in the future. But no, I'm really happy that you reached out to me and to be here and to talk about work that I love. And it sounds like you love, and hopefully your audience loves. It's a real pleasure and privilege to get to work on shows like The Twilight Zone.
I loved it. I haven't watched all of the second season yet, but I watched the first season and I really enjoyed it. And I'm going to be talking about replay from that season as well. Or I guess whenever this comes out, if I go chronologically, I will have already talked about
Right.
replay. But yeah, it's great. I'm a little disappointed that they decided to end it, but
I know,
it sounds
me
like
too.
that. I did read stories that it sounded like that they did make the decision to end it, and not that they were canceled because it was unpopular. And everything that I've heard, it seems like this series was quite popular. There were a few episodes that not everybody enjoyed, but I think there were more episodes that people enjoyed than not.
That's good to hear. I didn't know some of that, and look, all you want when you make something is to reach an audience that you connect with and that appreciates the work.
Yeah, well, I think you did that with Try. Like I said, I really loved it, and I've watched it, I think 3 times now, and as well as kind of looking at it with a fine-tooth comb, where I've rewind it a bit just to try and pick up all the little details. And every time I did, it's like I wasn't disappointed. If there was something else there.
That's so wonderful to hear.
Actually, I did just think of one other thing that I was curious about, that the sculpture that they were talking about. Was that something that was made specifically for the show, or was that based on an existing piece of art?
Are you talking about the sculpture that they were standing in front of when he drops the gum?
Bird with the clamshell and the
bird with the clamshell.
Yeah.
No, that's there. It's actually a very famous piece of art. And we were in this beautiful museum of Indigenous art in Vancouver, and there's a piece there. The sculpture is called The Raven and the First Men by Bill Reed. And it's at the UBC Museum of Anthropology in Vancouver, which is where we shot. We shot there. I believe we shot a couple of nights. We shot there, and we also shot up the street, also on the campus, for the exteriors. And we had to deal with some snow issues, which was surprising.
I apologize. I keep remembering different things.
Yeah, please.
But there was one other, like the gum that he drops. That since you mentioned the gum, I noticed that was Glee gum, which is, and I looked it up, and it's because it's not a brand that I'm familiar with.
Right.
Me spending most of the time in the Midwest, and right now I'm in the Atlanta area. But I guess it's plant-based, plastic-free. Was that a conscious decision to use that gum?
I have to admit that it was not my conscious decision, but I have no doubt it was the conscious decision within the art department.
And yeah, because I feel like that really, it just adds to the whole, nice guy, and leaning into the whole, cancel culture. Like, it's one step away from being like, look, it's plant free, no plastic. It's.
I mean, the reason I liked it was because of the way it looked, but I imagine that the art department, was aware of all that as well.
And that's also like another early slight hint towards Mark not being the nicest guy, because
Right.
most people, if somebody drops, even if it's something as small as a pack of gum, your first instinct is to say, oh hey, you dropped this, and give it back to them, not
Mhm.
hey, free gum.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And it's funny because all those little things, between the actors and myself have to modulate how much do we want this to hit? How much do we want people to key at these particular moments? Or does that just become one of many details that people add up later? So again, that's why these actors were perfect for this.
Yeah, and I think it's a sign of good art if it can be picked apart and still hold up to under scrutiny.
I think so too.
But yeah, once again, I'd like to thank you for joining me today, and you've been generous with your time, and you've been a real pleasure to talk to, and you've given me a lot of insight into the episode.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and thank you for watching. That you are who we make it for.
And as always, this has been Bubbawheat, and you can find me at flightsitesandmovienights.com. You can find me on Twitter at Bubbawheat. You can find this show, It's Time to Rewind, on Anchor.fm, as well as anywhere else that you listen to podcasts. We also have a Facebook group, It's Time to Rewind, a time loop group, and you can join and comment on episodes as they come out, as well as have discussion about time loop movies and stories in general. And until next time, I will be right here, trapped in the Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval. Submitted for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another dimension. Self.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
My name's Claudia.
Right. Right, yeah, no, right on. Do you want some gum?
Why do I need gum?
No, just thought that you might like some.